Have you ever wondered why some people seem to move through life with an unstoppable momentum, while others, equally talented and hardworking, remain trapped in cycles they can't seem to break? The answer might disturb you, because it has nothing to do with luck, privilege, or even the circumstances you were born into. What if I told you that right now, as you're watching this, there's an invisible script running in the background of your mind, a script that's been writing your destiny one silent thought at a time? Now think about this carefully. Every morning you wake up with certain patterns already activated. The way you talk to yourself before getting out of bed, the automatic thoughts that flood your mind when facing a challenge, the subtle ways you shrink or expand depending on who's in the room. None of this is random. These are your internal habits, and they're orchestrating your reality with far more precision than any external strategy ever could. Has this ever happened to you? You set a goal, you create a plan, you feel motivated, but somehow, inexplicably, you end up right back where you started. That's not failure. That's your internal programming doing exactly what it was designed to do. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Here's what most metaphysical teachings won't tell you. You're not living one unified life. Somewhere along the way, maybe in childhood, maybe during that painful rejection, maybe when you learned that certain parts of you weren't acceptable, you divided yourself. You created one version of yourself that pleases others, another that defends against attack, another that produces and achieves, and yet another that stays silent to keep the peace. This fragmentation wasn't a mistake, it was survival. But here's the truth that changes everything. What saved you then is now the very thing keeping you from becoming unstoppable. Your life right now is responding to this internal division like water responds to a broken channel. It scatters, it weakens, it never builds the momentum it could if it flowed in one unified direction. You search for signs, you consult teachers, you read books looking for the secret formula, but the real transformation doesn't happen in some external technique. It happens when you finally understand that your inner coherence, or lack of it, is literally shaping the physical reality you're experiencing. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover goes deeper than positive thinking or visualization exercises. We're talking about the actual mechanics of how consciousness creates form, how the silent conversations you have with yourself are setting energetic patterns that the universe has no choice but to reflect back to you. The question isn't whether you're powerful enough to change your life. You already are. The question is, are you willing to stop living as fragmented pieces and finally become... There's an ancient principle that's been hidden in plain sight for thousands of years, and once you truly grasp it, everything about how reality operates begins to make sense. The Greeks called it logos, but forget everything you think you know about philosophical concepts or abstract ideas. This isn't something you study, it's something you become. Logos is what happens when the war inside you finally ends. It's the exact moment when what you think, what you feel, what you say, and what you do stop contradicting each other and start moving in the same direction. That's when life stops feeling like chaos and starts feeling like destiny unfolding. Right now, if you're honest with yourself, you can probably identify the noise. You know that sensation when you're pulled in 10 different directions at once, when you say you want one thing, but your actions reveal something completely different, when you set an intention in the morning, and by noon you've already sabotaged it without even realizing how. That's not weakness. That's the natural consequence of internal division. Your consciousness is literally fighting itself, and the external world, your relationships, your finances, your opportunities, your health, is simply mirroring back that fragmentation. Here's the Hidden truth most transformation teachings miss entirely. Your blocks have almost nothing to do with not knowing what to do. You probably already know exactly what you need to do. The real issue is that you're trying to do it from a divided place. Think about it. You declare you want to move forward, to finally break through, to reach that next level, but simultaneously there's a part of you that's terrified of losing what's familiar. And that familiar territory, even if it's painful, even if it's limiting, has become your comfort zone. Not because it's comfortable, but because it's known. Your nervous system has mapped it, memorized it, made peace with it. So every time you try to step beyond that boundary, an invisible force pulls you back like gravity. If you found value in this, hit that subscribe button, because I'm consistently creating content that goes this deep. Tools and insights designed to help you become truly unstoppable. This is where the real transformation work happens. This is where most people misunderstand their own resistance. They think they lack discipline or motivation or willpower. But the real dynamic is far more subtle and far more powerful. What you're experiencing is habit disguised as identity. You've repeated certain patterns so many times, patterns of thinking, feeling, reacting, choosing, that they've become who you believe you are. And when something challenges that identity, even if it's an upgrade, your system interprets it as danger. The familiar may be a prison, but it's your prison, and there's a strange safety in that. Now, I want to go even deeper into this because understanding the mechanics changes everything. When you're operating from coherence, when your internal world is aligned, something remarkable happens. The universe doesn't have to guess what you want. You're not sending mixed signals anymore. You're not saying yes with your mouth while screaming no with your energy. You become what metaphysicians call a clear channel, and reality responds to clarity with shocking precision. But when you're divided, when part of you wants success while another part fears visibility, when part of you craves love while another part expects abandonment, when part of you reaches for abundance while another part clings to scarcity because it's all you've ever known, you create interference. And interference looks like stuck. It looks like cycles. It looks like trying hard and getting nowhere. It looks like bad luck, when really it's just conflicting instructions being broadcast simultaneously. The breakthrough doesn't come from doing more. It comes from becoming whole. And becoming whole starts with one simple but profound shift. Recognizing where you divided yourself in the first place, and understanding that what was once a survival strategy has now become the very thing limiting your expansion. The question isn't whether you're capable of change. You've already proven you can adapt. You did it when you learned to fragment yourself to survive. The real question is whether you're ready to integrate those pieces back together and discover what happens when all of your power finally moves in one direction. Write in the comments, "I'm ready to integrate," if this is resonating with where you are right now on your journey. What most people don't realize is that life is constantly giving you feedback, but not in the way you've been taught to interpret it. Reality doesn't sit you down for a performance review. It doesn't pat you on the back when you're doing well or shame you when you're off track. Life operates much more simply than that. It shows you. It reflects back to you the exact energetic state you're broadcasting, whether you're conscious of it or not. Think of existence as a mirror that has no agenda, no opinion, no emotional investment in your success or failure. It just reflects. And what it reflects is far simpler and more direct than your mind wants to accept. Because your mind has been trained to complicate everything. Here's where the real transformation begins. Understanding that when something shows up in your external reality, a difficult conversation, a missed opportunity, a pattern that keeps repeating, a relationship that mirrors your deepest insecurities, it's not punishment. It's not the universe being cruel or testing you or withholding your good. It's information. Pure, clean, neutral information about the state you're operating from. But here's the problem. You've spent so much of your life seeking approval or bracing for condemnation that you've lost the ability to simply observe what the mirror is showing you. Every reflection gets filtered through this question: am I good enough? And in that interpretation, you miss the entire point. When you look in an actual mirror and see that your hair is messy, you don't collapse into an existential crisis about your worth as a human being. You simply adjust your hair. The mirror wasn't judging you. It was informing you. But when life mirrors back something uncomfortable, maybe your bank account is reflecting financial chaos, maybe your relationships are reflecting emotional unavailability, maybe your health is reflecting years of ignoring your body's signals, suddenly it becomes deeply personal. You make it mean something about your value, your deservingness, your fundamental adequacy as a person. And in that drama, you completely miss the gift the mirror is offering: clarity about where you're divided. This is the hidden mechanism behind why some people seem to transform their lives rapidly while others stay stuck for decades. The ones who break through have learned to read the mirror without making it mean they're broken. They see a challenging reflection, and instead of spiraling into shame or defensiveness, they ask a completely different question. What internal state is this reflecting? Where am I still divided? What part of me is broadcasting a signal I'm not consciously aware of? That's not spiritual bypassing or toxic positivity. That's radical responsibility. It's the recognition that if your external world is showing you fragmentation, it's because somewhere inside, you're still operating from that fractured place we talked about earlier. The mind wants to argue with the mirror. It wants to explain why things are the way they are, to build elaborate stories about external circumstances, other people's actions, bad timing, unfair systems. And yes, all of those things exist. Context matters. But what you're learning here goes deeper than context. You're learning that regardless of external conditions, your internal coherence or lack of it is always shaping how those conditions affect you and what possibilities emerge from them. Two people can face the exact same challenge, and one will use it as a catalyst for breakthrough, while the other uses it as confirmation of limitation. The difference isn't in the challenge, it's in how they're reading the mirror. Now here's where this gets really practical, because we're not talking about abstract philosophy. We're talking about the actual mechanics of how you create your day-to-day experience. When you wake up tomorrow and check your phone and see something that triggers you, maybe it's a message you weren't expecting, maybe it's news that feels threatening, maybe it's just the absence of something you were hoping for. That moment is a mirror. What you do with that reflection determines everything. If you immediately make it mean something about you, if you spiral into a story about what it says about your worth or your future or your past mistakes, you've missed the information. But if you can pause and ask, what state am I in right now? And is this state aligned with where I want to go? That's when the mirror becomes a tool instead of a weapon. Leave a comment with the word mirror if you're starting to see how this applies to your own life right now. There's something critically important I need to clarify right now, because this approach to transformation is fundamentally different from what you've probably encountered before. This isn't about forcing yourself into a positive mindset or repeating affirmations until you believe them. What we're talking about here requires something far more powerful than optimism. It requires sobriety. And there's a massive difference. Optimism tries to convince you that everything is fine when it clearly isn't. Sobriety looks directly at what is and refuses to make it more dramatic than it needs to be. When you have a difficult day, when things don't go as planned, when you find yourself falling back into old patterns, sobriety doesn't say, I'm a failure, I'm broken, I'll never change. It says something radically different. Today my state is disordered. Today I'm operating from division instead of coherence. Today I need to realign. Notice the profound shift in that language. When you say, I am a failure, you've locked yourself into an identity. You've made a temporary state into a permanent definition of who you are. But when you say, my state is disordered, you've created space for movement. You've acknowledged the reality without making it your destiny. This isn't semantics. This is the difference between being trapped and having agency. The word am fixes you in place. The word is describes a condition that can shift. One closes doors, the other keeps them open. And in that small linguistic distinction lives the entire possibility of transformation. Now, here's what nobody tells you about why this work is so difficult. The reason you keep falling back into patterns you thought you'd outgrown. The reason you feel exhausted even when you haven't physically done that much. It's not because you're weak or undisciplined. It's because you're carrying an invisible weight that most people never even recognize. You're holding characters. Think about your life right now and be brutally honest. For a moment, how many versions of yourself do you perform on any given day? There's the version that shows up at work, competent, professional, unshakable. There's the version that appears in relationships, maybe overly accommodating, maybe guarded, maybe the one who always has it together. There's the version you present on social media, carefully curated to communicate success or happiness or whatever story you've decided the world needs to see. And then there's the version you are when you're completely alone, the one nobody else knows exists. Each of these characters was created for a reason. At some point in your journey, you learned that certain parts of you weren't safe to show, weren't acceptable, weren't going to get you the love or approval or security you needed. So you adapted. You built these personas as survival mechanisms, and they worked. They got you through. The problem is that what saves you in one season can imprison you in the next. Those characters that once protected you are now draining you, because maintaining a performance, even a performance you've gotten really good at, requires constant energy. It requires vigilance. It requires remembering which version of yourself you're supposed to be in, which context, making sure you don't slip, don't reveal too much, don't let the mask crack. And here's the exhaustion nobody talks about. It's not just the effort of performing. It's the internal conflict of knowing that none of these characters are the whole truth. Somewhere deep inside, there's a part of you that feels fragmented, scattered, like you left pieces of yourself behind in order to become acceptable. That internal division is where your energy bleeds. That's why you can sleep 8 hours and still wake up tired. That's why you can accomplish everything on your to-do list and still feel empty. You're spending your life force maintaining an illusion of coherence while actually living in fracture. The transformation we're building toward doesn't ask you to create a better character or a more impressive persona. It asks you to stop performing altogether. But before we can get there, you have to see clearly what the performance is costing you. You have to recognize that the familiar exhaustion you've normalized isn't just part of being an adult or having responsibilities. It's the specific fatigue that comes from living divided, from trying to be everything to everyone while losing touch with what's actually true for you. This isn't about blame. You did what you had to do to survive, to belong, to be loved. But survival mode was never meant to be a permanent residence. If this resonated with you, if something shifted while you were watching, hit that like button. It's a simple way to let me know this landed, and it helps get this message in front of more people who need to hear it. Let me be very clear about something that might shift how you see your entire journey up until now. When we talk about these characters you've been holding, this isn't about accusing you of being fake or inauthentic. You're not a liar. You're not manipulative. What you are is adaptive, and there's a crucial difference. These personas weren't created through conscious deception. They were born the moment you learned, often as a child, that your real state wasn't welcome. Maybe you expressed sadness and were told to stop being so sensitive. Maybe you showed excitement and were mocked for being too much. Maybe you needed help and were made to feel like a burden. In those moments, something inside you made a calculation. If being real isn't safe, I'll become what's acceptable instead. So you learned to silence what you actually feel. You perfected the art of smiling when you're breaking inside, because nobody wants to be around someone who's falling apart. You started speaking louder, more confidently, to hide the trembling uncertainty underneath. You became the funny one, the one who makes everyone laugh. Because humor is armor. It keeps people entertained enough that they don't look too closely at the loneliness you're carrying. None of this was malicious. It was survival. It was your brilliant, resourceful consciousness doing whatever it took to maintain connection, to avoid rejection, to secure your place in a world that felt conditional, and it worked. You survived. You made it here. But here's the truth that's harder to face. Survival strategies have an expiration date, and when you keep using them past their usefulness, they transform from protection into prison. The hidden cost of this performance reveals itself most clearly when the world goes quiet and you're left alone with yourself. Think about your nights. How many times have you laid in bed, exhausted from the day, ready to sleep, and instead your mind starts racing? How many times have you scrolled through your phone at midnight, watched another episode you don't really care about, done anything to avoid the stillness? There's a reason for that, and it's not insomnia in the traditional sense. Nighttime is when the character finally loosens its grip. It's when the persona you've been maintaining all day doesn't have an audience anymore and starts to fade. And when it fades, everything you've been pushing down, everything you've been performing over, everything you've been too busy to feel, it all surfaces. Suddenly you're confronted with the sadness you smiled through, the rage you suppressed to keep the peace, the deep need you pretended you didn't have because needing felt like weakness, the bone-deep fatigue that goes way beyond physical tiredness, the desires you've been denying because pursuing them felt too risky, the shame you carry about who you really are versus who you think you should be. All of it rises up the moment you stop acting, and your system doesn't know what to do with it. You're not practiced in simply feeling without immediately moving into action or distraction. So your body tenses, your mind fills with anxious thoughts, and you label it stress or anxiety, when really it's just the authentic you trying to be acknowledged. This is why so many people dread silence. It's not the quiet they fear, it's what the quiet reveals. In the noise and busyness of daily life, you can maintain the illusion. You can keep all the plates spinning, all the characters in rotation, all the emotions compartmentalized. But when everything stops, and there's nothing to do, and nowhere to be, the truth starts knocking. And if you've spent years, maybe decades, learning that your truth isn't acceptable, that knocking feels like a threat instead of an invitation, so you reach for the phone, turn on the TV, create more noise, anything to avoid that moment of reckoning with what's actually happening inside you. But here's what's extraordinary about understanding this mechanism. Once you see it, once you recognize that your exhaustion isn't coming from your circumstances, but from the constant effort of holding yourself together in a particular shape, you can make a different choice. You can start to question whether the characters you built are still serving you, or whether they've become the very thing standing between you and the life you actually want. And that questioning, that willingness to look behind the performance, is where real transformation becomes possible. Because you can't integrate what you won't acknowledge, and you can't heal what you keep hidden. What I'm about to reveal might be the most insidious pattern keeping you from becoming unstoppable, and it's so subtle that you probably don't even register it happening. It's not something dramatic that announces itself. It's quiet, consistent, and devastating over time. I'm talking about the habit of interrupting yourself, And I don't mean when external circumstances disrupt your plans or when life throws you a curveball. I'm talking about that moment right before you're about to begin something that matters, right when an authentic idea starts forming, right when a real emotion wants to surface, right when you're about to set a boundary you know you need, and you stop yourself. You cut it off. You redirect. You tell yourself, not now, or maybe later, or who am I to think I could do that anyway? This self-betrayal doesn't show up clearly in a single day. You interrupt yourself once, and it seems insignificant. But do it consistently over months and years, and you'll feel the accumulated weight without understanding where it came from. You'll sense that something in you is stuck, that you're always on the verge of starting but never quite launching, that your most authentic impulses die before they ever get a chance to breathe. And here's what makes this pattern so difficult to recognize. You've learned to frame it as something reasonable. You call it being realistic. You call it waiting for the right time. You call it being responsible or careful or smart. But underneath all those justifications is something much more primal. It's fear wearing a very convincing disguise. Let's get specific about what's actually happening in those moments of self-interruption, because understanding the mechanism is the first step toward changing it. When you're about to do something real, something that matters to you, something that would require you to be seen in a new way, your system runs a threat assessment. And that assessment isn't based on actual present-day danger. It's based on old data, ancient programming, memories of times when visibility led to pain. Maybe you shared something creative as a kid and got ridiculed. Maybe you expressed a need and were made to feel needy. Maybe you tried something bold and failed publicly. Whatever the original wound, your nervous system filed it away as evidence that exposure equals danger. So now, years later, when you're about to step into visibility again, even in a completely different context with completely different stakes, that alarm goes off. But here's the really tricky part. Your mind doesn't present this as fear. If it did, you might challenge it. Instead, it presents it as logic, as practicality, as legitimate reasons why now isn't the time. It'll tell you that you need to learn more first, prepare better, wait until circumstances are more favorable. It'll remind you of everything that could go wrong. It'll point out all the people who might judge you. And because this voice sounds so reasonable, so mature, so thoughtful, you listen to it, you honor it, you let it stop you. And in stopping, you betray the part of you that was ready to emerge. There's another layer to this that's even more uncomfortable to acknowledge. Sometimes you interrupt yourself not because of fear of failure, but because of loyalty to an old version of yourself that can't afford to see you grow. Think about that for a moment. If you actually followed through on that creative project, if you actually set those boundaries, if you actually pursued that dream, you would become someone different. You'd have to let go of the story you've been telling about why your life is the way it is. You'd have to release the identity of being stuck, or being the victim of circumstances, or being the person who could have but never did. And as painful as that identity might be, it's familiar. It's known. There's a strange comfort in staying small because smallness doesn't require you to step into the unknown territory of your own potential. This is why so many people live their entire lives on the edge of beginning. They collect courses they never complete, notebooks full of ideas they never execute, dreams they talk about but never take the first real step toward. And it's not because they're lazy or uncommitted. It's because at the moment of true beginning, when action would make the dream visible and therefore vulnerable to judgment or failure, they interrupt themselves. They find something else that needs their attention, some other priority that suddenly seems more urgent, some distraction that pulls them away from that uncomfortable edge where transformation actually lives. What makes this pattern so powerful is that interrupting yourself feels like protection. It feels like you're keeping yourself safe from disappointment, from criticism, from the pain of not being good enough. But what you're actually doing is something far more destructive. You're teaching your system that your authentic impulses can't be trusted, that your desires aren't valid, that the real you isn't allowed to fully exist. And every time you reinforce that message, you make it harder to break the pattern next time. The interruption becomes automatic, so fast you don't even notice it happening. You just know that somehow, once again, you're stuck. Comment, ready to start, if you're recognizing this pattern and you're ready to break it. What you need to understand about becoming truly unstoppable is that it has almost nothing to do with being perfect and everything to do with something far simpler but infinitely more powerful: continuity. This is where most people completely misunderstand how transformation actually works. They think they need to execute flawlessly, to never make a mistake, to maintain some impossible standard of consistency. And when they inevitably fall short of that unrealistic expectation, they use it as evidence that they're not cut out for change. But that's not how this works. Logos, that living coherence we've been building toward, doesn't install itself in perfect execution. It installs in your willingness to return. And there's a massive difference. Think about it this way. If you're building a house, you don't need every brick to be laid perfectly on the first attempt. What you need is to keep working on the same house. But what most people do is start building, hit a difficult section, abandon that structure entirely, and start a new foundation somewhere else. Then, they do it again and again. They end up with their energy scattered across a dozen unfinished projects, a dozen interrupted intentions, a dozen abandoned threads, and they wonder why nothing ever feels complete, why life feels so fragmented, why despite all their effort they never seem to arrive anywhere solid. It's because you can't build a house with fragments. You can only stack loose pieces that eventually collapse. The power of return is this. Every time you interrupt yourself and then come back to the same thread, you're training your system in something profound. You're teaching yourself that deviation doesn't mean destruction, that imperfection doesn't equal failure, that you can lose your way and still find it again. But if you never return to the same thread, if every interruption sends you searching for a completely new direction, you're not actually moving forward. You're just moving. And there's a world of difference between motion and progress. Progress requires that you keep coming back to the same essential work, the same core intention, the same foundational shift you're trying to make. Not perfectly, not without detours, but persistently, relentlessly. That persistence is what creates the conditions for logos to take root. Now I want to go even deeper into the actual mechanics of how your reality gets programmed, because this is where things get really precise. Before you speak a single word out loud, before you take any external action, there's already a conversation happening. It's the voice inside your head, that constant internal narrator that most people are so used to they don't even notice it anymore. This isn't some mystical concept. This is happening right now as you're watching this. There's a stream of internal language flowing beneath your conscious awareness, and it's not neutral. It's not just describing what's happening. It's actively organizing your state, shaping your perception, determining what you notice and what you ignore, what feels possible and what feels impossible. That internal voice, that constant murmur running in the background of your consciousness, is programming your reality with far more precision than anything you say out loud or post on social media. It's the difference between someone who encounters an obstacle and internally narrates, "Here we go again, nothing ever works out for me," versus someone who encounters the same obstacle and internally narrates, "This is challenging and I'm figuring it out." Same external circumstance, completely different internal programming, and that programming determines everything. How long you persist, what solutions you can see, whether you interpret difficulty as confirmation of limitation or as part of the process. Most people are running internal narratives they inherited, phrases their parents repeated, judgments they internalized from peers, conclusions they drew from painful experiences that they've been recycling ever since without question. And because this voice is so familiar, so constant, they assume it's just the truth, that it's an accurate representation of reality rather than one possible interpretation heavily colored by past conditioning. But here's the revelation that changes everything. You can change the internal word. You can rewrite the program, not by forcing yourself to think positive thoughts you don't believe, but by becoming conscious of what you're actually saying to yourself in those unguarded moments and choosing something more aligned with where you want to go. This is the hidden architecture of manifestation that most teachings completely miss. It's not about what you consciously desire or what vision board you create. It's about the constant low-level programming happening in your internal dialogue every single moment of every single day. If your internal word says, "I'm not enough," your actions will organize around proving or disproving that statement. If your internal word says, "People always disappoint me," you'll unconsciously create situations that confirm it, not because the universe is conspiring against you, but because your perception is filtering reality through that lens. Your decisions are being made from that assumption, and your energy is broadcasting that expectation. Here's what most people don't grasp about how reality actually operates, and once you get this, you'll never see your life the same way again. Every internal word you repeat is functioning as a contract, an energetic agreement you're making with the field of possibility around you. When your dominant internal narrative says life is dangerous, you're not just describing how you feel. You're signing a contract that your body, your nervous system, your unconscious mind will all honor. Your body will live in a state of perpetual defense. Your decisions will be filtered through the lens of threat. Your opportunities will be evaluated based on what could go wrong rather than what could go right. And the wild part is, you'll interpret this as wisdom, as being realistic, as protecting yourself. But what you're actually doing is limiting the spectrum of experiences available to you because you've contracted with danger as your primary operating assumption. Similarly, if your internal contract says, "I must prove myself," your entire existence becomes a performance. Every conversation is a chance to demonstrate your worth. Every achievement is measured against whether it makes you look good. Enough. Every relationship becomes transactional. What can this person offer to validate me? You wake up every morning already behind, already needing to earn your right to be here, already on a stage where the audience never stops judging. That's not ambition. That's exhaustion with a mission statement, and it all stems from that invisible contract you made so long ago that you don't even remember signing it. But your life is still operating under its terms, day after day, year after year, until you consciously recognize it and decide to renegotiate. Understanding this shifts everything, because it means you're not a victim of your circumstances. You're operating under agreements you can actually change. But here's where most people make a critical mistake when they try to change their internal programming. They think they can just jump from "I can't" to "I'm limitless and free and everything is perfect." And your body, your nervous system, the part of you that's been running the old contract for possibly decades, it laughs. It doesn't believe you. It registers that new phrase as a lie, and when your system detects incongruence, it rejects the entire effort. You end up feeling even more stuck because now you're not just dealing with the original limitation, you're also dealing with the failure of trying to transcend it. This is where bridge language becomes absolutely essential. You can't leap across a canyon in one jump when you don't have the strength or the training, but you can build a bridge. And bridge words are phrases that your system can actually believe right now, in your current state, that also open a door towards something different. Instead of trying to convince yourself, I can do anything, which feels ridiculous when you're deep in self-doubt. You say something your body can actually accept. I can attempt one section of this. Notice how different that feels. It's not declaring victory before you've started. It's not pretending you're someone you're not yet. It's acknowledging where you are while simultaneously creating space for movement. These bridge phrases work because they expand your container without shattering it. And this is crucial. Logos, that coherence we've been building toward, doesn't respond to fantasy. It responds to truth that's stretching toward possibility. When you say, I can attempt one section, you're telling the truth about your current capacity while also signaling to your system that movement is happening. That small expansion, repeated consistently, trains your nervous system that change doesn't have to be catastrophic. It can be gradual. It can be safe. And when your system feels safe enough to move, that's when real transformation accelerates. The art of this is finding the exact bridge that works for your specific contract. If your internal narrative has been, I always fail, you can't jump to, I'm a massive success. But you can bridge to, I'm learning from what didn't work. If your contract says, I'm not worthy of love, you can't suddenly affirm, I'm infinitely lovable, without triggering disbelief. But you can bridge to, I'm beginning to understand my worth. These aren't just semantic games. These are strategic reframes that honor where you actually are while pointing you toward where you're going. They're the difference between triggering your system's resistance and gently guiding it toward expansion. What's happening beneath the surface when you use bridge language is profound. You're literally rewriting your operating system one believable thought at a time. You're teaching your body that the old contract doesn't have to be permanent, that reality is more flexible than you thought, that who you've been isn't who you have to remain. And as that new contract starts to take root, as your internal word shifts from limitation to possibility, from fear to curiosity, from I can't to I'm attempting, your external reality begins to reorganize around that new frequency, not because you wished it into existence, but because you changed the fundamental programming that was generating your experience in the first place. We need to talk about what logos actually is in practical terms, because up until now, you might still be thinking of it as some philosophical concept, some spiritual idea you're supposed to understand intellectually. But that's not what this is at all. Logos isn't decoration for your mind. It's not a word you repeat to sound enlightened at dinner. In parties, logos is an axis, and an axis isn't something you admire from a distance. An axis is something you use. It's the central point around which everything else turns. It's what keeps a wheel spinning smoothly instead of wobbling and eventually shattering. It's what allows you to move forward with power and direction instead of burning energy in chaotic circles that get you nowhere. Think about your life right now and ask yourself honestly, what's your axis? What's the central organizing principle around which all your decisions revolve? Because whether you're conscious of it or not, you have one. Everyone does. The question is whether it's a true axis that actually supports your movement or a false axis that creates the illusion of progress while secretly exhausting you. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people are operating from false axes, and they can't figure out why they feel so tired despite working so hard, why they're spinning their wheels despite constant emotion. Let me show you what I mean. If your axis is approval, if the central organizing question of your life is, am I liked, am I accepted, am I good enough in other people's eyes, then you're not actually living your life. You're revolving around external signals that shift constantly and unpredictably. One day, someone validates you and you feel whole. The next day, that same person is distant and you feel destroyed. You make decisions not based on what's true for you, but based on what will maintain or increase approval. You shape your personality, your choices, your very identity around what you think will make others accept you. And the cruelest part is that it never ends. There's no final destination where you've accumulated enough approval to be free. You just keep spinning, keep performing, keep seeking that external validation that temporarily fills the void before it empties again. Control is another false axis that destroys people slowly. If your organizing principle is, "Nothing can get out of my plan, everything must happen exactly as I envision it," you're setting yourself up for a life of constant tension, because life doesn't work that way. Reality is fluid, unpredictable, responsive. The moment you try to force everything into rigid control, you're fighting against the fundamental nature of existence. And you can win small battles, you can micromanage, you can force outcomes, you can maintain the illusion of control for periods of time. But the energy cost is astronomical. You're tense all the time. You can't rest because resting means letting go of control. You can't trust anyone because trust requires releasing control. You can't enjoy the present because you're too busy trying to engineer the future. That's not power, that's prison. These false axes aren't morally wrong. This isn't about judging yourself for operating from approval or control or any other unstable center. It's about recognizing that these organizing principles are structurally unsound. They force you to spin while burning tremendous amounts of energy, and they can never actually get you where you want to go because they're not designed for that. They're designed for survival, for managing anxiety, for creating the temporary illusion of safety. But survival mode and thriving are not the same thing, and what got you through one phase of life will actively sabotage you in the next if you don't evolve your axis. A true axis, logos as the organizing principle, is completely different. It's not based on external validation or maintaining control. It's based on internal coherence. The question shifts from what will make others approve of me to what is aligned with my truth right now. It shifts from how can I control this outcome to how can I respond with integrity to what's actually happening. And that shift might sound subtle, but the impact is seismic. When your axis is internal coherence rather than external approval, you stop being a weather vane that spins with every shift in opinion around you. You become stable. When your axis is responsive integrity rather than rigid control, you stop fighting reality and start dancing with it. You become fluid without losing your center. This is what it means to become unstoppable. Not that nothing can knock you down, that's fantasy, but that when you do get knocked down, you know exactly how to find your center again, because your center isn't dependent on circumstances staying perfect or people staying pleased with you. Your axis is internal, which means it's always accessible. It's always there. And the more you return to it, the stronger it gets, the more quickly you can reorient. When life throws you sideways, the more trust you build with yourself that no matter what happens externally, you have something solid to return to internally. Comment true axis if you're starting to understand the difference and you're ready to build from a place of real stability. Now let's get into something that will fundamentally change how you understand reality creation, because this is where the rubber meets the road. Your life isn't actually made of facts. I know that sounds strange, but stay with me. Your life is made of what you attend to about the facts. Two people can receive the exact same news. Let's say they both lose their jobs on the same day, and they will inhabit completely different realities based on where their attention goes. One person's attention immediately locks onto catastrophe, spiraling into thoughts of financial ruin, personal failure, evidence that they're not good enough. The other person's attention, while acknowledging the difficulty, moves toward possibility. What this might be opening up, what wasn't working in that job anyway, what they've been wanting to explore but didn't have permission to pursue. Same fact, Two entirely different worlds being constructed in real time based solely on the direction of attention. This is the hidden truth behind every manifestation teaching that actually works. You're not creating reality out of thin air through wishful thinking. You're shaping your experienced reality through the allocation of your attention. Where attention goes, energy flows, and where energy flows, form follows. It's that direct, and once you see this mechanism clearly, you realize something both empowering and terrifying. You've been giving away one of your most potent creative forces without even knowing it had value. Your attention has been treated like an unlimited resource that doesn't matter, when in reality, it's the most valuable currency you possess. Because whatever you consistently attend to becomes your world. Here's the problem. And this is where things get really uncomfortable if you're willing to be honest. Your attention isn't naturally yours anymore. It's been trained. It's been domesticated. Most people believe attention is just something you either have or don't have, like it's a fixed trait. I have good focus, or I'm easily distracted. But that's not how it works. Attention is a habit, and like any habit, it can be educated, shaped, conditioned. And without your conscious awareness or consent, your attention has been educated by forces that profit from its capture. Screens designed by teams of engineers whose entire job is to make you check one more time. News cycles that operate on urgency and fear because those emotions guarantee you'll keep watching. Social media platforms that have gamified comparison and made you feel like if you're not constantly monitoring, you're missing out on something essential. You've been systematically trained to fragment your attention, to jump from stimulus to stimulus, to react to the immediate without ever settling into depth. You've learned to feel anxious when you're not checking, like there's some phantom emergency always one notification away. And this training didn't happen overnight. It's been gradual, sophisticated, relentless. The result is that most people no longer control their attention. Their attention is controlled by whatever is loudest, brightest, most emotionally triggering in any given moment. And when you lose sovereignty over your attention, you lose sovereignty over your life, because your life will always be shaped by whatever is capturing your focus. Think about your typical day and be ruthlessly honest about this. How much of your attention is actually directed by your conscious choice versus pulled by external triggers? You wake up, and before you've even registered being awake, you're checking your phone. Something you see there determines your mood for the next hour. You sit down to work on something that matters, and within minutes you're pulled away by a notification, a thought about something you need to check, an urge to see what's happening elsewhere. You try to have a conversation with someone you love, and part of your attention is already thinking about the next thing, or replaying something from earlier, or monitoring your phone even when it's face down on the table. This isn't focus, this is fragmentation. And fragmented attention creates a fragmented life. What makes this pattern so devastating is that you can be incredibly busy, incredibly productive in terms of tasks completed, and still be building nothing of substance because your attention never stays anywhere long enough to go deep. You're skimming the surface of everything, skimming information, skimming relationships, skimming experiences, skimming your own potential, and surface-level engagement produces surface-level results. You wonder why your life feels empty despite being full of activity. It's because you're not actually present for any of it. Your attention is scattered across 1,000 different targets, and where attention scatters, power dissipates. But here's what changes everything. The moment you recognize that your attention has been domesticated, you can begin the work of liberating it. You can start to reclaim sovereignty over what gets your focus and for how long. And when you do that, when you start directing your attention with intention, rather than letting it be yanked around by whatever's loudest, your reality begins to reorganize at a pace that seems almost magical. But it's not magic. It's just the natural result of your creative power finally being focused in one direction long enough to build something real. Let me give you a framework that will completely shift how you understand your power. Your attention isn't just focus, it's currency. It's the voting mechanism through which you tell the universe what kind of reality you want more of. Every single moment that you allow your attention to rest on an idea, you're casting a vote. When you scroll through social media and consume story after story of scarcity, people struggling, things going wrong, drama and conflict, you're voting for scarcity. You're telling your nervous system, this is what the world is, and your system responds by preparing you for that world. It heightens threat detection, it activates stress responses, it filters your perception through a lens of what could go wrong. And then you wonder why you feel anxious all the time, why opportunities seem to disappear, why you can't seem to catch a break. It's not bad luck, it's the accumulated result of where you've been spending your attention. The same principle works in reverse. Every moment your attention rests on possibility, not toxic positivity or delusional thinking, but genuine attention to what could work, what's emerging, what's available. You're voting for expansion. You're training your system to recognize opportunity, to notice openings, to interpret challenges as solvable rather than as confirmation of limitation. And Logos, that coherent organizing force we keep returning to, responds to repeated votes. It doesn't respond to what you wish for once in a while. It responds to where your attention consistently lives. This is why small practices have disproportionate power. It's not the individual moment of redirecting your attention that transforms everything. It's the accumulation of those redirections over time that rewrites your default settings. But here's where this gets tricky, and why most people struggle, even when they understand this intellectually. You can know that you should direct your attention toward possibility, toward coherence, toward what you're building. But then emotion shows up and suddenly everything you know goes out the window, because emotion doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't knock politely and wait for you to decide whether to let it in. Emotion enters. It occupies your body. It colors your thoughts. It hijacks your attention. And if you're not present enough to recognize what's happening, emotion simply takes the wheel and starts driving your life in whatever direction it wants to go. This isn't malicious. Emotion isn't your enemy. But emotion is energy in movement, and everything that moves seeks direction. When you don't provide that direction consciously, emotion will provide it unconsciously. And the direction emotion chooses is almost always based on protection, on avoidance, on ancient survival patterns that have nothing to do with your current reality or your actual goals. Think about the last time you felt intense anger. In that moment, did you calmly assess the situation and choose a measured response? Or did the anger make the decision for you? What you said, how you said it, what actions you took? Most people, if they're honest, will admit that emotion was driving, and whatever happened next was the result of that emotional direction, not conscious choice. The same thing happens with fear, with anxiety, with sadness, with jealousy, with any intense emotion. The emotion arrives, and if you're not trained to create even a small gap between the feeling and the reaction, you're just along for the ride. Your attention gets commandeered. You start thinking thoughts that confirm and amplify the emotion. If you're afraid, suddenly everything looks dangerous. If you're jealous, suddenly every interaction looks like evidence of betrayal. The emotion isn't showing you reality. It's filtering reality through its specific lens, highlighting whatever confirms its narrative, dismissing whatever doesn't. And in that hijacked state, you make decisions, you speak words, you take actions that your rational self would never choose. Then later, when the emotion subsides, you look at the damage and wonder, why did I do that? Understanding this mechanism is crucial because it reveals that becoming unstoppable isn't about never feeling difficult emotions. That's an impossible standard and a misunderstanding of how human consciousness works. Emotions are part of the system. They're going to arise. The question is whether you have enough presence, enough cultivated awareness to notice when emotion is taking the wheel and to gently, firmly take it back, not by suppressing the emotion or pretending it isn't there, but by acknowledging it without letting it dictate your direction. This is the difference between I am angry and I feel anger. The first one is identity. You've merged with the emotion. The second one is observation. You're experiencing the emotion while maintaining enough separation to still choose how you respond. This gap, this space between stimulus and response, between feeling and action, is where your freedom lives. It's where logos can actually operate instead of being overridden by emotional reactivity. And creating that gap isn't something that happens automatically. It's a skill you develop through practice, through repeatedly catching yourself in the moment when emotion is rising and choosing to pause instead of react, to breathe instead of speak, to feel instead of act. What we're building toward here is something that sounds simple, but is actually revolutionary in its impact on your daily life. It's the creation of what I call the sacred interval, that tiny space between when an emotion hits you and when you act on it. This interval can be incredibly small, sometimes just a single breath, but it's sacred because it's the only place where logos can actually operate instead of being overridden by reactivity. In that interval, your axis reappears. You remember who you're becoming instead of defaulting to who you've always been. You reconnect with your intention instead of being swept away by impulse. Without this interval, you're essentially giving the world a control panel with buttons that anyone can push at any time. Someone looks at you a certain way, and boom, you explode into defensiveness. Someone doesn't text back, and boom, you sink into catastrophic thinking about what it means and why they're pulling away. This is what it means to be managed by external circumstances. Every trigger gets an automatic response, and you're just cycling through the same patterns over and over, wondering why your relationships keep having the same fights, why your career keeps hitting the same obstacles, why you keep ending up in the same emotional states despite your best intentions to change. The reason is that there's no interval, there's no pause, there's no moment where you intercept the automatic program and choose something different. And without that interception, transformation is impossible. You're just a highly sophisticated stimulus response machine running the same loops your nervous system learned years or even decades ago. Creating the interval isn't about suppressing what you feel or pretending difficult emotions don't exist. That's actually the opposite of what we're doing here. We're not trying to bypass emotion or transcend it or rise above it with some kind of spiritual superiority. We're learning to work with emotion intelligently. And the key distinction is this: emotion without a rope becomes tyranny. It takes over completely. It dictates your thoughts, your words, your actions, your decisions. But emotion with a rope becomes a message. It becomes information you can actually use instead of a force that uses you. So what's the rope? The rope is anything that interrupts the automatic chain between feeling and acting. It could be as simple as one conscious breath, feeling the anger rise, and instead of immediately speaking, you inhale deeply and exhale slowly. That breath creates just enough space for you to remember that you have a choice. The rope could be a pause, a deliberate moment of silence where you feel the emotion fully in your body without letting it dictate your next move. It could be a bridge phrase you say to yourself, something like, "I'm feeling triggered right now, and I'm choosing not to react from this state." It could be a physical gesture, like placing your hand on your heart or unclenching your fists, a simple body movement that signals to your nervous system that you're here, you're present, you're not going to abandon yourself to the emotional storm. The rope could even be a time limit. Telling yourself, I feel this intensely right now, and I'm going to wait 1 hour before I respond. That hour gives the neurochemical surge time to metabolize, gives you distance from the heat of the moment, gives you perspective that's impossible to access when you're flooded with emotion. The specific form of the rope matters less than the fact that you have one. Because what the rope does is prevent emotion from becoming blind action. It doesn't deny what you're feeling. It doesn't minimize the validity of the emotion. It simply stops the automatic cascade from feeling to destructive acting out. This is where real mastery begins to develop, not the mastery of having perfect control over your emotions, but the mastery of being able to feel intensely without being controlled by what you feel. And that distinction changes everything, because the emotions will come. Life will continue to trigger you, people will disappoint you, things will go wrong, injustices will occur. You'll feel anger, fear, grief, frustration, jealousy, the full spectrum of human emotional experience. But with the rope, with the interval, with that sacred pause between stimulus and response, you get to decide how those emotions translate into action. You get to choose whether this anger becomes productive boundary setting or destructive lashing out. You get to choose whether this fear becomes wise caution or paralyzing avoidance. You get to choose whether this sadness becomes deep processing or a spiral into depression. The rope doesn't make you emotionless. It makes you responsive instead of reactive. And responsive people create different outcomes than reactive people. Responsive people build relationships that deepen over time instead of exploding repeatedly. Responsive people navigate challenges with strategy instead of panic. Responsive people make decisions. They can stand behind tomorrow instead of choices they regret as soon as the emotion passes. This is the practical application of everything we've been building. Logos as axis, attention as currency, internal word as programming. None of it matters if emotion can still hijack the whole system in an instant. Comment, I have my rope, if you're understanding how to work with emotion instead of being ruled by it. There's a fundamental misunderstanding about faith that keeps most people trapped in a cycle of starting and stopping, believing and doubting, moving forward and pulling back. They think faith is something that depends on results, on external confirmation, on proof that their belief is justified. But that's not faith. That's negotiation. That's telling life, show me first, then I'll believe. Give me evidence, then I'll commit. Guarantee the outcome, then I'll take the risk. And while that sounds like a reasonable, practical approach, it's actually a trap that strips you of power in the only moment where power actually exists, which is right now, in the present before the results show up. Think about what you're really doing when you make faith conditional on results. You're saying, I'll hold this vision, I'll maintain this intention, I'll stay aligned with this direction, but only as long as I see signs that it's working. The problem is that real transformation, the kind that actually reorganizes your reality at a foundational level, doesn't work on that timeline. There's always a gap between when you shift internally and when the external world reflects that shift back to you. Sometimes that gap is days, sometimes it's weeks or months, and if your faith can't survive that gap, if you need constant validation and immediate proof, you'll abandon the new direction before it has time to take root. You'll interpret the delay as evidence that it's not working, that you were foolish to believe, that you should go back to what's familiar and safe. This is why so many people never break through. They start something new. They commit to a different way of being. They align with a vision that excites them. But then the mirror doesn't immediately change. The external circumstances don't instantly reflect the internal shift. And without proof, without validation, without visible progress, their faith collapses. They decide it wasn't real, it wasn't working, it was just wishful thinking. And they retreat back to the old patterns, the old beliefs, the old identity. Not because the new direction was wrong, but because their faith was contingent on quick results instead of being rooted in something deeper. The kind of faith we're talking about here is completely different. It's not a feeling. It's not some luminous, blissed-out state where you're floating on clouds of certainty. It's a conduct. It's an internal orientation you maintain, even when the external mirror isn't applauding yet, even when circumstances look the same or maybe even worse while even when people around you are questioning your choices. This kind of faith is the capacity to hold your axis steady while everything around you is still reorganizing to match your new frequency. And it's one of the most challenging things you'll ever do, because your modern mind has been educated to measure everything, to track metrics, to demand visible signs of progress. That ability to measure and track is incredibly useful in certain domains. It's how you build businesses, how you monitor health improvements, how you know if a strategy is working in the material world. But when you try to apply that same demand for immediate, measurable evidence to internal transformation, it becomes poison. Because the deepest shifts happen in territory that can't be measured with external metrics. How do you measure the reorganization of your nervous system? How do you quantify the moment when an old pattern finally releases its grip? How do you track the subtle but profound shift when you stop seeking approval as your primary axis and start operating from internal coherence instead? These changes are real, they're powerful, they're transformative, but they're not showing up on a spreadsheet. What happens in that gap between internal shift and external manifestation is crucial. This is where you're being tested. Not by some cosmic force trying to see if you're worthy, but by your own system checking whether this change is real or just another temporary enthusiasm. Your nervous system has seen you start things before. It's watched you get excited and then abandon ship when things got difficult or unclear. So when you claim you're different now, when you say you've shifted, when you declare a new intention, your system is essentially saying, prove it. And the only way to prove it is to hold the new orientation without needing constant external validation. This is faith as conduct. It's choosing the aligned action even when you can't see the full path. It's maintaining your internal word, even when the old circumstances are still reflecting the old programming. It's treating yourself like someone who's already arrived at the destination in terms of how you make decisions, how you spend your attention, how you respond to challenges, not because you're pretending or faking it, but because you understand that the external world is always playing catch-up to your internal state. And if you keep changing your internal state based on what the external world is currently showing you, you'll never get anywhere new. You'll just keep recreating variations of what already is. Type holding steady if you're ready to develop faith as conduct rather than negotiation. Now let me introduce you to the most underutilized navigation system you already possess, one that's been giving you perfect information your entire life that you've probably been ignoring or misinterpreting. I'm talking about your body. Not your body as a machine you need to maintain or optimize, but your body as an oracle, a direct line to truth that doesn't require analysis, debate, or mental gymnastics. The body doesn't speak with arguments. It doesn't build cases or present evidence. It speaks with sensations, and it doesn't try to persuade you of anything. It simply informs you. The problem is that you're so accustomed to living from the neck up, so trained to trust only what your mind can rationalize, that you've learned to dismiss what the body is constantly telling you as irrelevant noise, as inconvenient feelings, as weakness you need to push through. But here's what you need to understand. The body is where logos becomes tangible first. Before your mind wraps language around an experience, before you can articulate why something feels off or aligned, your body already knows. It's already responding. Someone makes you an offer that looks perfect on paper, great opportunity, good money, impressive title, and your stomach tightens. your mind immediately jumps in with explanations. You're just nervous, you're self-sabotaging again, you're scared of success. But what if that tightness isn't fear of the good thing? What if it's your body's way of saying, this isn't aligned, something here doesn't match your truth, this will cost you in ways you can't see yet? How many times have you overridden that signal, convinced yourself your body was just being irrational, and then 6 months later you're dealing with exactly the consequences your body tried to warn you about? The body has a quality that your mind loses constantly, and that quality is presence. Your body exists only here, only now. It can't be anywhere else. But your mind is a time traveler. It's replaying yesterday, rehearsing tomorrow, comparing this moment to other moments, interpreting everything through layers of meaning and story and analysis. And in all that interpretation, your mind can fabricate a world that has very little to do with what's actually happening. You've experienced this. You've had your mind tell you that someone is upset with you, that a situation is dangerous, that an opportunity is too good to be true, and none of it was based on what was actually present. It was based on projection, assumption, past pattern recognition being applied inappropriately to current circumstances. Your body doesn't do that. Your body responds to what is. And its language is incredibly simple. This tenses me, or this loosens me. That's it. 2 signals, tension and release, contraction and expansion. And those 2 signals, if you actually learn to read them, are worth more than 1,000 intellectual analyses, more than hours of pros and cons lists, more than all the advice well-meaning people can give you. Because your body is giving you direct feedback about alignment. When something is true for you, when a decision matches your actual values and direction, when a person or situation is genuinely good for you, your body loosens. There's an opening, a softening, a sense of spaciousness, even if there's also nervousness or uncertainty. But when something is misaligned, when you're forcing yourself into a direction that violates your truth, when you're saying yes when your system wants to say no, your body tenses, your jaw clenches, your shoulders rise, your breathing gets shallow, your stomach contracts. The mastery here isn't in never feeling tension. Tension will arise in growth, in challenge, in stepping outside comfort zones. The mastery is in learning to distinguish between the tension of growth and the tension of misalignment. Growth tension comes with an underlying sense of rightness, a feeling of, this is hard but true. Misalignment tension comes with a feeling of wrongness, of forcing, of betraying something essential, and your body knows the difference instantly. Your mind needs time to figure it out, needs to gather evidence, needs to justify its position. But your body knows in the first second, in the first sensation, if you're willing to listen. This is why becoming unstoppable requires you to drop down out of the constant mental chatter and check in with somatic truth. Not to bypass thinking, thinking has its place, but to let body wisdom inform your thinking rather than letting thinking override body wisdom. Because when you're aligned at the body level, when there's loosening and opening and a felt sense of yes, your actions flow differently. There's less resistance, less friction, less exhausting yourself trying to make something work that doesn't want to work. And when you notice tension, chronic tightness, that persistent sense of bracing yourself, that's information. That's your system saying, we're off course, we're operating from an old program, we're divided again. Leave listening to my body in the comments if this is opening up a new way of navigating for you. There's one more layer of programming we need to address because it's so pervasive, so normalized, that most people don't even recognize it as programming at all. I'm talking about your relationship with time. Time isn't just something you measure with clocks and calendars. Time is something you believe, something you've been conditioned to experience in a very specific way, and that conditioning functions as a hypnosis that most people live under their entire lives without ever questioning it. You wake up in the morning, and before you've even fully opened your eyes, the clock is already telling you who you are. You're late, you're early, you're behind. You're productive, you're slow, you're insufficient. You're racing against deadlines you didn't choose, operating on schedules that have nothing to do with your actual rhythm, judging yourself based on whether you're keeping pace with some external standard of what should be accomplished by when. And you've gotten so used to obeying that voice, so accustomed to letting time pressure dictate your emotional state and your sense of self-worth, that you treat it like absolute truth. But it's not truth. It's one particular relationship with time that was installed in you through cultural conditioning, through economic systems that profit from your urgency, through educational structures that trained you to produce on command. And the result is that most people live in a constant state of time scarcity, always feeling like there's not enough, like they're not moving fast enough, like they're missing out or falling behind or running out of runway. This isn't a neutral observation about how long things take. This is an emotional stance, an internal pressure, a hypnotic suggestion that you've accepted as reality. The specific mechanism of this hypnosis is brilliant in its effectiveness. It works by convincing you that you're always arriving late to your own life, that somewhere back there, at some point you can't quite identify, you missed the moment. You didn't start early enough, didn't prepare thoroughly enough, didn't move quickly enough. And now you're perpetually behind, perpetually trying to catch up to where you should already be. This creates a psychological state of chronic insufficiency that has nothing to do with your actual capabilities or achievements. You could accomplish incredible things and still feel behind because the hypnosis isn't about what you've done. It's about the gap between where you are and where the trance tells you you should be. And here's what makes this particularly insidious. The trance tells you that the solution to feeling behind is to go faster, to do more, to cut out rest, reflection, presence, to treat every moment like a race, to measure your worth by your productivity, to feel guilty when you're still, anxious when you're slow, ashamed when you need time to process or integrate or simply be. This constant rush feels like efficiency, feels like ambition, feels like what successful people do. But it's not efficiency, it's trance. And trance consumes logos. It makes coherence impossible because you're moving too fast to feel whether you're aligned, too rushed to check in with your body, too urgent to create the sacred interval between emotion and action. When you're operating from time hypnosis, you make decisions from pressure rather than clarity. You say yes to things because you feel like you don't have time to properly consider them, like you have to decide now or the opportunity disappears. You abandon directions that were actually working because they're not producing results fast enough according to some arbitrary timeline you internalized. You exhaust yourself trying to meet deadlines that were never about actual necessity and everything about maintaining the trance of busyness. And in all that rushing, you miss your life. You miss the present moment, which is the only place where creation actually happens, where logos actually operates, where you actually have any power. Breaking this hypnosis doesn't mean ignoring practical time. Management or pretending deadlines don't exist. It means recognizing that your emotional relationship with time is largely constructed, and that construction is serving forces that don't necessarily have your best interests at heart. When you can separate actual time constraints, the plane leaves at 3, the meeting starts at 9, from the emotional urgency that makes you feel perpetually insufficient, you create space for a different experience. You discover that you actually have more time than the trance told you. Not because the clock changed, but because you stopped bleeding energy into the constant anxiety about whether you're moving fast enough, doing enough, being enough, according to some external measurement that was never about your truth in the first place. Comment, breaking the trance, if you're recognizing how time urgency has been controlling your experience. Let me reveal something that might be uncomfortable, but is absolutely crucial to understand if you want to break through to the next level. What's holding you back right now probably isn't what you fear, it's what you know. I know that sounds backwards, but stay with me. Your mind doesn't resist change because the new thing is inherently dangerous or wrong. Your mind resists change because the new thing has no map, no coordinates, no established pathway. And your nervous system, which was trained to survive by being able to anticipate and prepare, experiences that lack of map as threat. The known, even when it's painful, even when it's clearly limiting you, even when you consciously hate it, the known has one quality that your system values above almost everything else. It's predictable. Predictability creates a sense of control, even if that control is an illusion. When you know what to expect, when you've been through this pattern before, when you can anticipate how things will unfold, your nervous system relaxes just enough to function. But the unknown triggers every alarm your survival instincts have. Because in evolutionary terms, the unknown could contain danger, could expose you to threats you're not prepared for, could lead to outcomes your system hasn't learned to navigate. So even when the known is a prison, even when staying where you are is slowly killing your spirit, there's a part of you that clings to it because at least you know how to survive here. You've mapped this terrain. You know where the edges are. You know what to expect. This is why people stay in relationships that stopped working years ago, why they remain in careers that drain them, why they keep repeating the same patterns of behavior even while consciously wishing they could change. It's not stupidity, it's not weakness, it's loyalty to the known operating beneath conscious awareness, convincing you that even though this is painful, at least it's familiar pain. And familiar pain feels safer than the uncertainty of what might happen if you stepped into the unknown territory of actually changing. Now let me go even deeper into why this pattern is so difficult to break, because there's another layer that most people never examine. Many of your decisions, maybe most of your decisions, aren't actually made by choice. They're made by belonging. You make choices based on maintaining connection to your family of origin, to your cultural identity, to a role you've been playing, to a narrative you've been living, to a shared trauma that became the glue holding certain relationships together. Sometimes you don't change, not because you can't, but because changing would feel like a betrayal, like you're leaving people behind, like you're saying the old way was wrong, like you're abandoning those who couldn't make the same shift. This belonging contract operates at a level deeper than logic. It's woven into your identity, into your sense of who you are and where you fit. If your family has a story of struggle, of making do with less, of surviving through hardship, and you start to thrive, start to expand beyond those limitations, start to embody abundance, there's often a guilt that rises up. Not a rational guilt, but a primal sense that you're breaking an unspoken agreement, that your success somehow makes their struggle meaningless, that by becoming different, you're saying they weren't enough. And rather than deal with that guilt, rather than risk the loss of belonging that might come with outgrowing the family pattern, you unconsciously sabotage yourself. You keep yourself small enough to still fit in the box that was built for you. The same dynamic plays out with your past self. You've built an identity around certain struggles, certain limitations, certain stories about who you are and why your life is the way it is. And as much as you say you want to change, there's a part of you that's loyal to that identity because it's been your companion, your explanation, your excuse. If you actually transformed, if you actually became the person you claim you want to be, you'd have to let go of the story. You'd have to release the identity of being the person who can't because. And that identity, even though it's painful, has given you something. Maybe sympathy, maybe an explanation for why things haven't worked out, maybe a sense of solidarity with others who share the same struggle. Letting that go feels like losing yourself, losing your people, losing your justification, and your system would rather stay stuck in a known. Struggle with a clear identity than venture into unknown territory where you don't yet know who you'll be or whether you'll still belong. This is the hidden architecture of why transformation is so rare. Not because people don't want it, because wanting it with your conscious mind, while your unconscious loyalty contracts, are pulling you back to the known, creates an impossible tension that most people can't sustain. Right, I see the contract, if you're recognizing the invisible agreements keeping you in familiar patterns. Now I need to show you one of the most sophisticated tricks your system uses to keep you from moving forward. And it's so convincing that you probably won't want to believe it's happening, even as I describe it. There are two kinds of fear. There's the obvious kind, the kind that makes your hands shake, that makes you sweat, that you can feel in your chest and acknowledge as fear. That kind is actually easier to work with because at least you know what you're dealing with. But then there's the dangerous kind, the kind that dresses itself up in perfectly reasonable logic. This fear doesn't announce itself. It doesn't say, "I'm terrified." Instead, it says things that sound incredibly sensible. Now isn't the right time. This isn't practical. There are too many unknowns. I need more information first. The conditions aren't optimal. There are no guarantees this will work. And because these statements sound so rational, so mature, so thoughtful, you listen to them. You honor them. You let them stop you. But here's what you need to understand. Fear disguised as logic is still fear. It's just wearing a business suit instead of showing up in its raw, vulnerable form. And the reason this disguise is so effective is that it appeals to your desire to be smart, to be reasonable, to make good decisions. Nobody wants to be reckless or impulsive. Nobody wants to make choices they'll regret. So when your internal voice presents what sounds like a careful analysis of why this isn't the right move, you assume that voice is protecting you with wisdom. But what if it's not wisdom? What if it's just fear that's learned to speak in a way that you'll respect? The way to distinguish between genuine analysis and sophisticated avoidance is actually quite simple, though it requires brutal honesty with yourself. True analysis ends in action. It gathers information, weighs options, considers consequences, and then it arrives at a decision and moves. Avoidance stays in thought. It keeps gathering more information, finding more reasons to wait, discovering new conditions that need to be met first. Fear disguised as logic is recognized by one telltale sign. It never actually reaches the step. There's always one more thing to consider, one more box to check, one more guarantee to secure before it's safe to begin. Think about something you've been putting off, something you know you should do, but haven't. Now listen to the voice that's been keeping you from doing it. Does that voice say, "I'm scared"? Probably not. It probably says something that sounds much more sophisticated. "I need to research this more thoroughly. I should wait until I have more resources. I don't have all the pieces in place yet. The timing isn't right. What if I make the wrong choice?" All of these sound like legitimate concerns, and sometimes they are. But here's the test. Does that voice ever give you permission to begin? Or does it keep moving the goalposts, keep finding new reasons to delay, keep demanding conditions that would have to be perfect before you're allowed to take the first step? Life doesn't work by offering guarantees before you move. Life works by offering direction and asking you to trust that direction enough to take the next step without knowing how the entire journey will unfold. But fear disguised as logic demands the full map before it will let you leave the starting point. It wants to see the end from the beginning. It wants assurance that there won't be failure, discomfort, judgment, or loss. And because life can't offer those assurances, the fear gets to keep you paralyzed while convincing you that you're just being prudent. The shift happens when you start questioning your own reasoning with the same rigor you apply to external claims. When that voice says, "It's not the right time," ask it, "Will there ever be a perfect time? And if I'm honest, is this about timing or is this about terror?" When it says, "I need more information," ask, "At what point will I have enough information? And am I gathering information to inform action, or am I gathering information to avoid action?" When it says there are no guarantees, ask, "What am I really afraid will happen if I move forward anyway?" This interrogation isn't about forcing yourself into reckless action. It's about getting underneath the sophisticated language to the actual fear that's running the show. And once you can see the fear clearly, once you can name it without letting it hide behind logic, you have a choice. You can acknowledge the fear and choose to move anyway, creating that sacred interval we talked about earlier, where you feel the emotion without letting it dictate the decision. Or you can keep letting fear masquerade as wisdom while your life stays exactly where it is, safe and small and endlessly analytical. We need to talk about something that might be one of the most painful recognitions you'll have on this journey, and it's this. Sometimes the prison you're living in doesn't look like a prison at all. Sometimes it has awards hanging on the walls. Sometimes it comes with respect, admiration, a title people recognize. Sometimes it's built from achievements you worked incredibly hard for, a reputation you spent years cultivating, a role you perform so masterfully that everyone counts on you to be exactly that person. And somewhere along the way, you forgot that you chose this identity, or maybe you didn't even choose it consciously. It chose you, or circumstances shaped you into it, and now you can't remember what it feels like to rest from it. That's identity, when it becomes an elegant cage. Not the obvious kind of limitation where you can see the bars and know you're trapped. The sophisticated kind where the cage is decorated so beautifully that you convince yourself you're free. Think about the primary role you play in your life. Maybe you're the responsible one, the one everyone can count on, the rock. Maybe you're the successful one, the achiever, the one who makes things happen. Maybe you're the caretaker, the one who holds everyone else together. Maybe you're the rebel, the one who questions everything. These identities aren't inherently wrong. They gave you something valuable, belonging, purpose, a sense of who you are in the world. But here's what happens over time. The identity that once served you starts to constrain you. You want to rest, but the responsible one doesn't get to rest. You want to be vulnerable, but the successful one can't show weakness. You want to receive care, but the caretaker's job is giving, not receiving. You want to find peace, but the rebel's identity requires something to fight against. And the most insidious part is that you've gotten so good at being this version of yourself that other people now expect it from you. They've built their relationship with you around this identity. They know how you'll respond, what role you'll play, what they can count on you for. And if you start to shift, if you start to show parts of yourself that don't fit the established character, there's often pushback. Not necessarily malicious pushback, but the subtle discomfort of people whose own systems are organized around you, staying in your assigned role. So you feel the pressure to maintain the performance, to keep being who they need you to be, even when it's exhausting you, even when you've outgrown it, even when staying in that cage is slowly suffocating the person you're becoming. Breaking out of an identity cage is terrifying for a specific reason. You don't know who you'll be without it. That identity has been your compass, your resume, your introduction to the world. I am the person who, and whatever comes after that statement has been your anchor. Remove it, and you're in free fall. You're undefined. You're in that space between identities that feels like nothingness, like you've disappeared, like you've lost yourself. And this is where most people panic and rush back to the old identity or frantically grab onto a new one just to have something to hold on to. anything to avoid the terror of that empty space. But here's what I need you to understand with absolute clarity. That void you're experiencing when an old identity starts to crumble, that's not death. That's threshold. It's the space between who you were and who you're becoming. And your mind interprets it as lack, because your mind was trained to see emptiness as dangerous, as something to fill immediately. You feel internal silence where there used to be constant drive, and you think something's broken. You notice that the ambitions that used to fire you up don't move you anymore, and you conclude you've shut down, that you've lost your edge, that something's wrong with you. But what if nothing's wrong? What if this void is exactly what needs to happen before something new can emerge? Nature understands this perfectly. A seed has to break open, has to lose its form as a seed before it can become a plant. There's a moment in that process where it's neither seed nor plant. It's in between, it's dissolving, it's formless. And if that seed had consciousness, it would probably panic, thinking it was dying. But it's not dying, it's transforming. The void isn't lack. The void is gestational space. It's the necessary emptiness that allows new form to organize itself. And if you can learn to tolerate that space without rushing to fill it with the first identity that makes you feel solid again, something extraordinary can happen. The new form that emerges won't be something you constructed out of fear or grabbed out of desperation. It'll be something that arose from your actual truth, from a deeper place than the roles and reputations and performances you've been cycling through. What you're experiencing in that void space isn't just emptiness, it's also cleansing. It's the necessary clearing out that has to happen before new form can settle into place. And if you look at how nature actually operates, this principle is everywhere. After the harvest, the field doesn't immediately get replanted. It rests. The soil regenerates, nutrients redistribute, the ecosystem rebalances itself. After you prune a plant, cutting away what's dead or overgrown, the plant doesn't instantly produce new growth. It goes quiet for a period, reorganizing its internal systems, redirecting sap and energy to where it's needed most. After a massive storm clears the atmosphere, there's often this profound stillness, this quality of air that feels clean and new, like the chaos was necessary to reset conditions. There is no life without these intervals. Growth isn't constant. Expansion doesn't happen in an unbroken upward line. Everything in nature pulses: activity and rest, growth and consolidation, outward movement and inward integration. But the time hypnosis we talked about earlier has convinced you that intervals are loss, that rest is falling behind, that any period where you're not actively producing or achieving is wasted. So when you hit one of these natural pauses, when your system needs to go quiet to reorganize around a new level of being, you panic. You interpret it as failure, as depression, as stagnation, and you try to force yourself back into activity before the integration is complete, before the void has done its work. This is where understanding the actual mechanics of transformation becomes critical. Because if you can recognize when you're in a gestational void versus when you're genuinely stuck, you can work with your natural rhythm instead of against it. The void asks you to trust a process you can't see, to allow emptiness without immediately filling it, to rest without guilt, to let old forms dissolve completely before grasping for new ones. And if you can do that, if you can tolerate the discomfort of not knowing who you're becoming while the old identity falls away, what emerges on the other side isn't something you forced into existence. It's something that was waiting for the space to reveal itself. Now, moving through this territory requires something that most people have a deeply conflicted relationship with, and that's discipline. The word itself probably creates a reaction in you. For many people, discipline tastes bitter because it's associated with harshness, with forcing yourself to do things you don't want to do, with that punishing internal voice that demands perfection and accepts nothing less. It sounds like sacrifice, like war against your own body and desires, like an unforgiving taskmaster that never lets you rest. And because discipline has been presented that way, as something rigid and punitive, a lot of people reject it entirely. They swing to the opposite extreme: total dispersion, constant improvisation, living completely at the mercy of whatever mood happens to be present in the moment. But here's what you need to understand. Neither of those extremes is logos. Punishing yourself into rigid discipline creates internal war, and you already know that internal division is what we've been working to heal this entire time. But complete abandonment of structure, complete surrender to impulse and fluctuating emotion creates chaos. And chaos isn't freedom, it's just a different kind of trap. What we're building toward is something else entirely, a third way that most people never discover because they're stuck in the false binary of rigid control versus total abandon. Real discipline, discipline as an expression of logos, is care. It's how you take care of the life you're building, how you protect your energy and direct it toward what actually matters, how you create conditions that allow your transformation to stabilize instead of collapsing every time things get difficult. This kind of discipline doesn't sound like a drill sergeant screaming at you to push through pain. It sounds like a wise friend saying, "I know you're tired, and rest is important. And also we both know that if you don't do this thing you committed to, you'll feel worse. So let's find a way to do it that honors both your exhaustion and your commitment." Discipline as care recognizes that you have limits, that you need rest, that perfection is impossible and trying to achieve it is destructive. But it also recognizes that your future self is counting on your present self to follow through, to keep showing up, to maintain the thread of continuity we talked about earlier. And that's not punishment. That's love. It's how you demonstrate to yourself that you're trustworthy, that when you say something matters, you act like it matters, that you're not just a collection of good intentions that evaporate the moment discomfort appears. Leave discipline as love if this reframe is shifting how you see the structure you need in your life. There's one more piece of this puzzle that we need to address, because it's where a tremendous amount of your energy is being held hostage. And that's the misunderstanding around forgiveness. Most people approach forgiveness like it's a moral obligation, like it's something you're supposed to do to be a good person, to be spiritual, to take the high road. And when forgiveness becomes an obligation, when it's something you force yourself to perform because you think you should, it becomes completely hollow. You say the words, "I forgive you," with your mouth while your entire system is still burning with resentment, still replaying the injury, still waiting for justice or acknowledgement that never comes. That's not forgiveness, that's performance. And Logos doesn't operate through performance. Logos requires real order, authentic resolution, genuine release. Here's what forgiveness actually is. When you strip away all the spiritual platitudes, it's energy liberation. It's the recognition that holding on to resentment, rage, the need for the other person to suffer or understand or apologize, all of that is binding. Your energy to them. You're not hurting them by staying angry. Most of the time, they've moved on with their lives, while you're still carrying the weight of what happened, still giving them real estate in your mind, still letting that past violation determine your present emotional state. Every time you replay the story, every time you imagine what you should have said, every time you fantasize about them finally getting what they deserve, you're spending currency. You're investing attention and emotional energy into something that cannot give you a return. Forgiveness, in the most pragmatic sense, is cutting that energetic cord. Not because they deserve it, not because what happened was okay, not because you're morally superior and rising above, but because you deserve your energy back. You deserve to stop paying a daily tax on something that already cost you enough when it happened. This kind of forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. It doesn't require you to pretend the harm didn't occur or to put yourself back in proximity to someone who's dangerous for you. It's an internal release that says, I'm done giving this my life force. I'm reclaiming my attention. I'm freeing myself from the cord that's been keeping me tethered to a painful past. And when you do this, when you genuinely release, not as performance but as liberation, something shifts in your entire system. Energy that was locked up in that resentment becomes available again. You suddenly have more capacity, more clarity, more ability to direct your attention toward building what you actually want, instead of maintaining a grievance that's keeping you small. This is why forgiveness is ultimately selfish, in the best possible way. You're not doing it for them. You're doing it for you, for the life you're trying to create, for the person you're becoming who can't move forward while dragging chains from the past. Now, achieving this kind of release requires something most people don't cultivate anymore, and that's genuine silence. Not just the absence of external sound, but the absence of unnecessary internal noise. You can sit in a completely quiet room and still have a hurricane happening inside your head, replaying conversations, rehearsing arguments, planning futures, reviewing past failures, generating anxiety about things that haven't happened and might never happen. That's not silence. That's just noise, without external audio. True silence is rare because it can't be bought, can't be faked, can't be rushed into existence. It has to be cultivated through practice, through repeatedly choosing to step out of the constant mental chatter and into a quality of internal stillness. And when you do cultivate that silence, when you learn to quiet the incessant narration and analysis and judgment and planning, something that seems almost mysterious starts to happen. Your reality begins to reorder itself, not because silence is magical, but because silence allows you to finally see what was there all along beneath the noise. You see patterns you've been repeating without awareness. You notice intuitions your chattering mind was drowning out. You recognize that the voice you thought was truth was actually just habitual thinking, recycled fears, inherited beliefs that you never questioned because they were running beneath conscious awareness. In the silence, all of that becomes visible. And what's visible can finally be addressed, released, transformed. If you're still here, if you made it all the way through this journey with me, I want to acknowledge something. You're not watching this by accident. The fact that you stayed, that you absorbed these concepts, that you're still engaged, that tells me you're serious about this transformation. You're not looking for quick fixes or surface-level inspiration that evaporates by tomorrow. You're ready for the real work, the kind that actually changes the fundamental operating system of your life. So here's what I want to invite you to do. If this resonated, if you found yourself recognizing patterns you've been living unconsciously, if even one piece of this shifted something in you, hit that subscribe button. Because this isn't the only conversation we're having. There's so much more depth to explore, so many more layers of this work to unpack together. And I'm here consistently, showing up with content that's designed to meet you exactly where you are and take you exactly where you're trying to go. This channel is your resource for understanding the mechanics of consciousness, not as abstract theory, but as practical transformation you can apply immediately. And leave me a comment. Just write, I made it to the end, so I know you were here for this entire journey. I read these comments, I see you, and it helps me understand what's landing, what's resonating, what you need more of. Your engagement isn't just a metric, it's a conversation, and I genuinely want to hear from you. If this was valuable, if it gave you clarity or challenged you in ways you needed to be challenged, go ahead and hit that like button. It's a simple gesture, but it tells the algorithm to share this with more people who are searching for exactly what you just experienced. And honestly, it tells me you felt the connection too. Now, there's a video right here that goes even deeper into how to actually implement these principles in your daily life. The practical steps, the exact practices, the ways to integrate this understanding so it becomes your lived experience, not just an intellectual concept. Click on it and continue this work with me over there. Let's keep going.